My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 34 years old, and 3 months ago, my sister stood in a lawyer's office, smiled at me across the table, and calmly told me our father had left everything to her. Every dollar, every property, every share of the company he spent 30 years building. She said it like it was normal, like it didn't matter that I had spent the last decade working beside him, helping him build that business from nothing. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my father had left me something else, something that would destroy everything she thought she had won. But to understand how we got there, you need to understand my family. Because on the outside, we looked perfect. We grew up in Plano, Texas, in a quiet neighborhood where every house had a 3-car garage and every lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine. My father, Robert Carter, started a logistics company in 2004. Nothing huge at first, just him, a used pickup truck, and a contract delivering medical supplies between Dallas hospitals. But by the time I turned 18, that little company had grown into Carter Regional Logistics, 12 trucks, 112 employees, and annual revenue just over $4.2 million. My older sister Emily never cared about the business. She cared about appearances. Emily was the kind of person who always had the newest phone, the newest car, the newest designer bag. When she turned 21, my parents bought her a BMW 328i. When I turned 21, my dad handed me the keys to an 8-year-old Ford Ranger from the company lot and said, "Congratulations, son, you're working full-time now." And honestly, I was proud of that, because my father and I were close, really close. When I graduated from Texas A&M in 2014 with a degree in supply chain management, I didn't go work for a big corporation like most of my classmates. I went straight to work for him. Starting salary, $38,000 a year, which was less than what some of our warehouse supervisors made. But my dad always told me the same thing. "Daniel, one day this will all be yours." And I believed him. For 10 years, I worked 60 to 70 hours a week, helping him grow that company. By 2023, we had 47 trucks, 112 employees, and $18.6 million in annual revenue. I handled operations, hiring drivers, negotiating fuel contracts, managing dispatch software. My father handled the clients and the finances. Emily? She showed up maybe twice a year, usually when she needed money. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came on March 11th, 2024. At 2:17 in the morning, my phone rang. It was the hospital. My father had collapsed in his office from a massive stroke. He died 6 hours later. Just like that. No warning, no goodbye. The funeral was held 4 days later at St. Andrew Methodist Church in Plano. More than 300 people showed up. Drivers, clients, employees. Men who had worked with my dad for 20 years stood there crying like they had lost a brother. I remember standing next to Emily during the service. She was wearing a $2,400 black Dolce & Gabbana dress. I know because she told someone behind us. Daddy would have wanted me to look my best. That should have been my first warning, but I was grieving, and when people grieve, they don't always see what's right in front of them. 2 weeks later, we met with my father's estate attorney, David Klein. His office was on the 18th floor of a glass building in downtown Dallas. March 26th, 10 a.m. I remember every detail. The smell of leather chairs, the sound of traffic outside the windows, the way Emily kept checking her phone while Mr. Klein organized the documents on his desk. Then he cleared his throat and said, "Your father's estate is valued at approximately $7.4 million. Emily sat up instantly, but the next sentence changed everything. The majority of the estate, including Carter Regional Logistics, has been left entirely to Emily Carter. I actually thought I misheard him. Wait, what?" Emily smiled, and that's when she said the sentence I will never forget. "Dad always trusted me with the money." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Emily, I've been running the company for 10 years." She shrugged. "Well, now you work for me." But that wasn't the worst part. Not even close. Because 2 days later, I discovered something in my father's office safe. Something he had hidden. Something Emily had no idea existed. And when I finally understood what it meant, I realized my sister had just made the biggest mistake of her life. When I left David Klein's office that morning, I sat in my truck in the parking garage for almost 20 minutes without turning the engine on. My hands were shaking. 10 years. 10 years of building that company beside my father, and suddenly I was nothing more than an employee under my sister. Emily walked past my truck while I was sitting there. She didn't even look at me. She was on the phone saying something like, "Yeah, the estate is worth around $7 million, but the company will probably sell for way more." Sell. That word hit me like a punch to the stomach, because Carter Regional Logistics wasn't just a business, it was my father's entire life, and mine too. I drove straight to the company office in Plano after that meeting. The building looked the same as it always had: white brick, blue metal roof, a row of our trucks lined up beside the warehouse. But walking inside felt different. Employees kept coming up to me offering condolences. Drivers asking how the family was doing. No one knew yet. No one knew Emily now owned the company. Around noon, I walked into my father's office. The room still smelled like his coffee. His desk was exactly the way he left it, legal pads stacked neatly, his reading glasses beside the computer, and behind the desk was the large gray safe he kept built into the wall. I had seen him open it 100 times growing up, but he never told me the code until about 3 years earlier. One night we were closing the office late, and he said something strange. "Daniel, if anything ever happens to me, the code is 0914. I never asked why. At the time, it felt like one of those uncomfortable conversations people avoid thinking about. But now, standing in that empty office, I typed the numbers into the keypad. The safe clicked open. Inside were exactly what you'd expect: business contracts, property documents, insurance paperwork, but in the back corner was a small sealed envelope with my name written across the front. Not typed, handwritten. My father's handwriting. Daniel. My chest tightened the second I saw it. I sat down in his chair before opening it. Inside was a letter, just one page, but it changed everything. The first line read, "Son, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and something has happened that I hoped never would." My hands started shaking again as I kept reading. He explained that about 2 years earlier, Emily had convinced him to update his will. She told him she needed full control of the estate for tax purposes. At first, he trusted her, but later he discovered something. Emily had already been negotiating with a private investment group in Dallas, a firm called Lansford Capital. She planned to sell the company the moment he passed away. My father wrote that when he confronted her about it, she denied everything, but he didn't believe her, and that's when he decided to create something he called the contingency. The next sentence in the letter made my heart start racing. "Daniel, legally the company may belong to Emily on paper, but operational control belongs to you." At first, that didn't make sense until I reached the second envelope inside the safe. This one was thicker. Inside were several legal documents signed by my father and notarized. One of them was titled Irrevocable Operational Authority Agreement. My father had quietly filed it with the company's corporate structure 18 months earlier. It stated that in the event of his death, all executive decision-making power transferred to me as managing director for a minimum of 5 years. Emily could technically own the company, but she couldn't fire me, she couldn't sell it, she couldn't make major financial decisions without my approval for 5 full years. I leaned back in the chair staring at those documents for a long time. Then I started laughing, not because it was funny, but because my sister had no idea what she had just walked into. She thought she had won everything, but the truth was, she had inherited something she couldn't control. And the best part? she was about to find out the hard way, because the following Monday morning, Emily walked into the office like she owned the world, and that's when I decided it was time to show her exactly what our father had left me. But the confrontation that happened that day is something I will never forget, and neither will she. Monday morning came faster than I expected. I got to the office at 6:30 a.m., the same time I had arrived almost every day for the past 10 years. The warehouse lights were already on, a few drivers were drinking coffee near the loading dock, getting ready for their morning routes. Everything looked normal, but inside the office, I knew something was about to change. By 8:45 a.m., the parking lot started filling up with employee cars. Dispatchers were logging into the system, warehouse supervisors were checking shipment manifests. Then, at exactly 9:02 a.m., a white Mercedes GLE pulled into the front parking spot. Emily stepped out wearing sunglasses and carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than my first car. 2 seconds later, she walked through the front door like she had just bought the place. Technically, she thought she had. I watched from my father's office window as she looked around the building, almost like she was inspecting her new property. Then she walked straight down the hallway and pushed open the office door without knocking. She stopped when she saw me sitting behind my father's desk. Her smile disappeared instantly. "What are you doing in here?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I closed the folder I had been reading and leaned back in the chair. "This is still my office." She laughed. "Actually, it's mine now." Then she walked around the room looking at the bookshelves, the awards on the wall, the framed photos of my dad with employees and clients. "You know," she said casually, "this place is a lot smaller than I remember." I could already feel my patience slipping. "Emily, what do you want?" She sat down in the chair across from the desk and crossed her legs. "Well, first, we need to talk about your role here." "My role?" "Yes." She pulled a folder out of her bag and slid it across the desk. I opened it, and honestly, I had to read the first page twice, because what she was offering me was insane. She wanted me to move from managing director of operations to operations consultant. Hourly pay, no authority over staff, no decision-making power. Basically, she wanted to demote me to a glorified advisor in the company I had spent a decade building. I looked up slowly. "Are you serious?" She smiled. "Daniel, let's be realistic. You were helping Dad run things, but this is a multi-million-dollar company now. I'm bringing in professional management." I stared at her. "Professional management?" "Yes," she leaned forward. "Lansford Capital is sending an executive team next week to evaluate the company." There it was, the confirmation, the exact thing my father warned me about. Emily was already preparing to sell the business. She stood up and adjusted her purse strap. "So, if you want to stay here, sign the contract. If not, you can collect your things by Friday." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just opened the desk drawer and pulled out the folder containing my father's documents. Then I placed it on the desk between us. Emily looked confused. "What's that?" "You should read it." She sighed dramatically, but opened it anyway. The first page was the Operational Authority Agreement. She scanned the first paragraph casually, then she reached the second page, and suddenly her expression changed. Her eyes started moving faster across the page. Then she flipped to the last document. Her face went completely pale. What is this?" I leaned forward slightly. "That's the part of Dad's estate plan you didn't know about."
"This isn't real. It's been filed with the corporate registry for 18 months. She slammed the papers down on the desk. "You're lying." I slid another document across to her. It was the notarized filing confirmation. The room went quiet. For the first time since she walked in, Emily looked nervous. "What does this mean?" "It means you own the company." She exhaled in relief. For a second, I thought, "But you can't run it." Her smile disappeared again. "What?" "For the next 5 years, all executive control belongs to me." She blinked. "That's not possible. You can't sell the company." Silence. "You can't replace management." More silence. "And you definitely can't fire me." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You're joking." I shook my head. "No." Emily grabbed the documents again, flipping through them frantically like she was hoping the words would magically change. "They'll challenge this." "Who?" "The investors." I leaned back calmly. They can try, but any sale without my approval violates the corporate authority clause. The deal would collapse instantly. Her breathing was getting faster now. You planned this. I almost laughed. No, Emily, Dad planned this. She stared at me like she had never actually seen me before. Then she said something that shocked me. You think this is over? I raised an eyebrow. It's just getting started. She walked out of the office without another word, but the next thing she did was something even my father didn't see coming, and it almost destroyed the entire company. Emily didn't come back to the office for the rest of that day, but I knew she wouldn't stay quiet for long. People like my sister never accept losing control. They just look for another way to win. By Tuesday morning, I found out exactly what she had planned. At 7:15 a.m., our head dispatcher, Mark, knocked on my office door. Daniel, we've got a problem. I looked up from my laptop. What kind of problem? He hesitated for a second. Payroll. My stomach tightened. What about it? Half the drivers just called saying their direct deposits didn't go through. That made no sense. Payroll had been automated for years through the same system. I logged into the finance dashboard immediately, and that's when I saw it. The payroll account had been frozen overnight. Authorization required from the owner of the company, Emily. She had found the one thing she could still control: money. Without payroll, drivers wouldn't work. Without drivers, the trucks wouldn't move. And if the trucks didn't move, the company would collapse within weeks. I picked up my phone and called her. She answered on the third ring. Oh, Daniel. Her voice sounded almost cheerful. What did you do? What are you talking about? Payroll is frozen. There was a small pause. Then she laughed. Well, I guess that's what happens when someone tries to run a company they don't own. Emily, people need to get paid. Then maybe you should sign that consultant contract I offered. That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't just about money anymore. She wanted revenge. For what? I asked. For embarrassing me in that office yesterday. I took a slow breath. You're going to destroy Dad's company just to win an argument? No, she said calmly. I'm going to sell it, just faster than planned. Then she hung up. For the next 2 hours, the office felt like chaos. Drivers were calling, dispatch was panicking. If the situation wasn't fixed quickly, the damage could become permanent. But there was one thing Emily didn't understand about the company. Even though she owned it, she didn't know how it actually worked. Because 3 years earlier, when the company expanded past 80 employees, my father and I had opened a secondary operational account. It was meant for emergency logistics expenses, fuel, repairs, overtime payments. Emily didn't know it existed because her name wasn't attached to it. Mine was. By 10:40 a.m., I had transferred enough funds to cover every employee's paycheck. Mark walked back into my office an hour later, smiling. Drivers just confirmed their deposits hit. Good. One crisis solved. But the real storm came later that afternoon. At 3:30 p.m., a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. 2 men stepped out wearing suits. I recognized one of them immediately from the documents in the safe. Michael Lansford, the CEO of Lansford Capital. Emily walked in behind them with a confident smile. They entered my father's office without knocking. Michael Lansford looked around the room slowly. So, you're Daniel? Yes. He extended his hand. I've heard a lot about you. I shook it cautiously. Then he sat down across the desk. Emily remained standing beside him. Michael spoke calmly. We've been discussing the acquisition of this company for several months. I know. Emily crossed her arms. And Daniel is apparently refusing to cooperate. Michael looked at me. Is that true? Yes. Why? Because this company isn't for sale. He smiled slightly. Everything is for sale. Not this. Emily leaned forward. You're being ridiculous. I ignored her. Michael tapped his fingers lightly on the desk. Daniel, do you know what our offer is? I've seen the preliminary numbers. $22 million. The room went quiet. Even I had to admit, that was a huge number. Emily smirked. See, you're being selfish. But Michael continued. And if the deal goes through, you personally would receive around $3 million after taxes. $3 million. 10 years ago, I would have taken that offer in a heartbeat. But this wasn't about money anymore. This was about my father's legacy and my sister's betrayal. So I looked directly at Michael and said something he clearly wasn't expecting. Even if you offered $50 million, my answer would still be no. Emily slammed her hand on the desk. You don't get to decide that. I calmly slid the operational authority agreement across to Michael. He read it carefully, then leaned back in his chair. Well, that complicates things. Emily's face turned red. You said this wouldn't matter. Michael sighed. It matters. For the first time since walking in, Emily looked scared, because the investors she thought were on her side suddenly weren't so sure. But what happened next was something none of us expected, because 2 weeks later, a secret from Emily's past came out, and it destroyed her entire plan overnight. The meeting with Michael Lansford ended in a way Emily definitely didn't expect. When he stood up to leave, he shook my hand again. Then he looked at Emily and said something that wiped her confidence off her face. We'll need to reassess the situation. Reassess. That's not what she wanted to hear. She followed him and his partner out to the parking lot, arguing the entire way. I watched from the office window as she waved her arms, clearly frustrated. But the truth was simple. Without my approval, the sale was impossible, and Lansford Capital wasn't going to risk a legal nightmare over a company that suddenly had internal conflict. For the next week, Emily stopped showing up to the office completely. No calls, no emails, nothing. And honestly, the company ran better without her. Drivers were back on schedule, clients never even knew there had been a problem. But on Thursday morning, something happened that changed everything. Around 11:20 a.m., our accountant, Sarah, knocked on my door. She looked nervous. Daniel, do you have a minute? Sure. She walked in holding a folder. I was reviewing some old financial records from last year for tax preparation. Then she placed the folder on my desk. And I think I found something you should see. Inside were several printed bank statements. They were from a corporate account I recognized, but the transactions didn't make sense. Large withdrawals, wire transfers, multiple payments to a consulting company I'd never heard of. I looked up at Sarah. What is this? She hesitated for a second. These transactions were approved by your father, but they were requested by Emily. How much money are we talking about? Sarah swallowed. About $1.8 million. My stomach dropped. Over what period? 14 months. 14 months. Nearly $2 million moved out of the company, and I had never seen it in any operational reports. Then I noticed something else. The receiving company, Elliott Strategic Consulting. I grabbed my laptop and searched the name. 30 seconds later, the information popped up. The company had only one registered owner, Emily Carter. My sister had been secretly funneling money out of the company for 11 years, and if that money came from corporate funds, it wasn't just unethical, it was fraud. I leaned back in my chair slowly. Everything my father suspected was true, but the real explosion happened 3 days later, because Sunday evening, Emily showed up at my house, unannounced. She looked different. Her hair was messy, her makeup was smudged, and for the first time in my life, my sister looked genuinely scared. Daniel, we need to talk. I stepped outside onto the porch. What's wrong? She paced back and forth for a few seconds before speaking. The investors backed out. I wasn't surprised. But that's not the problem. What is?